Hi everyone and welcome to our next tutorial in Tinkercad. So far we've been working with digital signals, and remember, when we talk about a digital signal we're talking about an input of a 0 or a 1 or an output of a 0 over 1 or 0 volts or 5 volts. But what about in between those ranges? What if we had something that looked like it was between 0 or 5 volts? When we talk about a digital signal, we're talking about binary. It's a 0 or it's a 1 and there is nothing else. But we can also have those conditions that are more than that. And in those cases, we need to talk about analog. And an analog value can be a range between two numbers. So for instance, we could talk about for analog a range between 0 volts and 5 volts, and we could have something that looks like 1 volts or 2 volts or 3 volts or 4 volts. So we're going to take a look at analog in this tutorial and try to understand how it works with Arduino. So you can see here that I've got a potentiometer, and the way I've got it wired is the left outside pin goes to ground, the right outside pin goes to 5 volts, and the middle pin is going to be the input signal to the Arduino board. And because it's a potentiometer, it has a wide range of values that it could give us. And we are going to send that through this yellow wire here, and that's going to be an input to A0. Notice these here ports A0 to A5, these are what we call analog input pins. In other words, they can accept values more than just a 0 volt signal or a 5 volt signal. It can actually accept ones in between those ranges. And we're going to show that here with a voltmeter. So all we've got here is a potentiometer. The input is going to go into analog A0, and it is going to be a range between 0 and 5 volts. And we're going to see that with the multimeter. So all our code is doing here is it's just telling us in void setup that pin mode A0 is an input pin. We'll talk about serial begin in a minute. Then all we're going to do in void loop is take and read the input from A0, and we're going to put it in a variable called input from pot, or input from potentiometer. And we'll talk about these two lines later on. So all we're doing here is sending a voltage in to the Arduino board that varies between 0 and 5 volts. So if I move my potentiometer and I move it around clockwise, I can see that the voltage is increasing as I move in this direction with my potentiometer. So what I'm doing is I'm sending in a voltage of different values as I move my potentiometer around. Now, how does the Arduino look at an analog signal? Well, in a nutshell, what it does is it takes a look at the value that it's getting. So for instance, if I say that the input is 1 volt going in to the Arduino board, and I'll try to set this as close as I can to 1 volt there, or fairly close. So let's say that that's close. Hopefully it sits there. And then what the Arduino board does is it looks at it in terms of a binary number. And the binary number it looks at is some number between 0 and 2 to the 10th. In other words, it has a 10-bit binary number. And the biggest value you can get from that, 2 to the 10, is 2024. So if I say that 1/5 of 5 volts is 1 volt, and I set my potentiometer to put an input of 1 volt in to the Arduino board, what the Arduino board sees is 1/5 of this number here, and that's how it deals with analog values. So if we take our calculator and we take 1/5, so 1 divided by 5 gives me 0.2, and I take 0.2 and I times it by this number here, 1024. What the Arduino board sees is 205, because it rounds, it doesn't keep this, but it sees it as an integer. It rounds to 205. So an input of 1 volt really means 205 to the Arduino board. So let's take a look at it. And we can do that using something called the serial monitor. So down below here, you can see a serial monitor. And what we can do is we can display what values look like inside the Arduino board. And the way that I'm going to set up my serial monitor is I must have serial.begin in brackets 9600, and that's in brackets, and then full colon. And then inside my void loop, I have to tell what I want to send to this serial monitor. In this case here, I want to do a serial.print the input from pot. I want to send that to this serial monitor so I can see it. And I can see what the Arduino sees for this value. This serial print ln, it's just going to create a number of hyphens just so it does the right formatting on the output. So let's take a look at it. So if I bring this back down to 0 and I open up my serial monitor, what I'm seeing here is I'm seeing a bunch of zeros. And when I move my potentiometer just ever so slightly, I see a number. And that is what the Arduino is seeing as the analog input. And as I go clockwise, that number gets even bigger. We said that if we go back to this here, if I take 1/5 of the total, 1/5 of the total is 1 volt, it should give me an output of 1/5 of 10,024 is 205 if we round it. So if I move this up to 1 volt and try to get it right on 1 volt, there it is. The serial monitor is seeing exactly what we expected. It's seeing 205. The maximum, remember, is 1024. So if we said half of that, half of 1024 is 512. So if we go up halfway, halfway would be halfway to 5 volts. That would be 2.5 volts. Let's try to get it right to 2.5 volts. And right there. And we're getting very close to 512. We're getting 511. What the serial monitor range is for this is 0 to actually 1023. It doesn't actually show 1024. The maximum is 1023. So we expect it to be a little bit lower. Half of 5 volts is 2.5 volts. So the serial monitor is seeing the value 511. If we crank this fully to 5 volts, we should expect it to go to the maximum value, and that maximum value is 1023. For the next assignment, you are going to set up this exact same circuit, except what I want you to do is create this circuit, create the code, And I want you to put your potentiometer on exactly 4 volts and then show me what the serial monitor is reading. And I want you to do the math using paint. So in other words, I want to see the numbers like I showed you here, except I did it for 1 volt. I want you to do it for 4 volts, and you're going to tell me what the number should be as the output, and it should match up with this number that's showing right here. So your assignment, build this exact same circuit. You're going to put your potentiometer, so the input is 4 volts, and you're going to tell me what I should be seeing in the serial monitor theoretically, and then I should see what it's actually reading. That's it for this tutorial. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.